use of force rules of the criminal code. Also things like mental toughness, training your mind to deal with situations. That is the best weapon that you can have, is your mind. Being able to train for any given situation that you may come across. I can't say enough about mental toughness training. Also situational awareness, and that comes in many forms. Being able to look at a situation, predict what is going to happen, and have a plan before you go into that situation can really make things a lot simpler. And that would include reading of body language. You know, being able to predict that too is very important. Also, something that's not looked at with situational awareness that much is SEPTED, crime prevention through environmental design. The way buildings and any structure of any sort, the way it's designed and what can happen due to the design process, and how you can identify that and identify targets that are issues to you and how to prevent it, or maybe even change them. Very simple techniques. So mental toughness, situational awareness, I think is, like I said, very important. And the more you do train with that, the better off you'll be. Some of the other issues you have is with the way the public is right now and the addictions issues. Meth, you find quite often the level of violence involved with anybody that is on meth is raised. Years ago, it was heroin that was causing a problem, but meth seems to take it to a different level. And a lot of the other issues that are involved with addictions and the violence related around that, training is absolutely imperative. So the more you know, the more you prepare, the safer you will be. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. Scott, if you can introduce yourself, please.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Scott Croft. I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico in the United States. I've been a security guard for just over 12 years with 4 years of United States Marine Corps experience and 4 combat tours in Iraq. I am a security guard instructor, a firearms instructor. I tend to specialize in the area of use of force and how to apply your defensive tools that you have, your handcuff, mace, baton, and firearm, in a situation where you may have to use them and use them correctly. Some of the things that I have seen personally, I've been involved in 3 or 4 different shooting incidents here in Albuquerque doing loss prevention. I've responded to domestic violences where I was caught in the middle of a shooting incident. I had at the beginning of last year an incident where I was dealing with a hostile subject, and the next day he initiated a SWAT situation with an AK-47 shooting at people around his apartment complex and the freeway that runs adjacent to the complex. What I can tell you, going with Mr. Muldoon's bit, was situational awareness is a huge, huge important thing that security guards need to focus on. You need to be aware of where you're at, what's going on, and what the potential dangers are around you. Using a threat analysis is probably going to be your best tool for this. With drugs, again, drugs are such a huge, huge problem, especially down where I'm at. I deal with drug violence from gangs. I deal with the drug violence from the cartels and just the regular idiots around Albuquerque. I can tell you that the weaponry that we are seeing is getting bigger and in caliber wise, which means they can reach further. An AK-47, for example, we know that it can reach for up to 800-900 yards, maybe not with a great impact at target, but it can reach that far. So if you think about how far you are away from somebody, a mile is your reach out and touch somebody distance with most of your modern day firearms. Another thing that I want you guys to be cognizant of as well is your legal training, knowing what your local laws and are. For example, I know in Canada, it's much different in the United States, where we have laws that impact our duties state by state, and they're all different. So when I'm talking to guards from around the United States, I have to be cognizant of all of the municipalities around and the different aspects. So doing this with the IFPO and what Glen's putting together is going to be hugely beneficial for all of us.
Thanks, Scott. Just to reiterate the point that Scott made, certainly, and I can't speak about anything else other than beyond Canada or the United States, but as Scott has pointed out, in the United States, states have their own criminal codes, whereas Canada, we have a federal criminal code. And so whether you receive training in use of force, it's going to be the exact same rules and regulations across the entire country. So I actually just want to make a point here. Somebody's gone on here and has made a comment about the use of the term security guard, saying that that's offensive. And this is a very interesting conversation. I know this has absolutely nothing to do with the workplace violence and what we're talking about today, but it is very much a point of contention with a lot of people. I personally don't find it offensive, and to be perfectly honest, in Alberta, we're not actually, there's legislation that does not allow us to use the term security officer. When the legislation was created about in 2010, they made it very specific. It was the term was security services worker or security guard. Now, they're not going to come and arrest you and put you in handcuffs if you use the word security officer. People use that term all the time. But again, just from some people use the term guard, other people use the term officer. I personally think that I think it's kind of a bit of a red herring. I think the industry has bigger issues to worry about than that term. I understand it. It's supposedly a sign of respect to refer to somebody as a security officer. My personal opinion, again, is I actually think we should be reclaiming that term, security guards, but be that as it may. So before we get into some question and discussion here, one of the things I want to bring up, I'll just share my screen here for a second. Back in late 2019 and early 2020, I undertook some research into how security personnel manage workplace violence, and I created a good practice guide. As you can see, I'm sharing my screen with everybody right now. And it's, as you can see, the name, it's Protecting the Protective Security Guard Tactics for Managing Workplace Violence. And for those of you who are interested, I will make this available through the IFPO website. I interviewed 20 security personnel about how they're managing workplace violence and found some really, really interesting conclusions. Probably the most important point that I got out of this research is the fact that it's not if a security person, and it doesn't matter, guard, officer, whatever, security personnel, it doesn't matter. It's not a matter of if you're going to be exposed to violence. It's a matter of how often are you going to be exposed to violence. It is common. And part of the research that I did, I undertook a literature review. And from a workplace violence perspective, we are seeing levels of violence escalate pretty much across the world for anybody who's in a position of authority. Violence against police officers is skyrocketing, violence against teachers, violence against security personnel, violence against bus drivers. It just seems that my interpretation of this is if you're in an area of enforcing rules, and that's a fundamental responsibility of security personnel, then you're going to come into conflict with somebody who doesn't like those rules being enforced. And as a result, there is a potential for violence. So on that note, John, just want to start off by asking you a question. Like, I know you already talked about this, but like, has there been a change, let's say, in the last several years that you've seen in teaching security personnel around the use, like the exposure to violence?
Yes, definitely. Years ago, security personnel were, quite often they'd be just in a location as static, just guarding something. Now the interactions that they have with people, the expectations from the general public towards security is a lot higher. And what I've said to every class that I've instructed over the years is, I truly believe that the role of security is much tougher than being a police officer. There's no doubt in my mind, because police officers, they have the powers, stronger powers of arrest and all that. They have more training, and they also have a lot of the equipment that security personnel do not have, and do not have the opportunity to have because of legislation. So they have to deal with the same people that the police do, but with less tools. So it all comes down to what you say. Your mouth is your biggest ally. So it is a lot tougher. And yes, the stories I've been hearing from security personnel, what they're put up against, it is just incredible how that has changed over the years. Not too long ago in Toronto, there was an issue where security guards were dealing with a guy with a machete. And handguns, that's more often, as well as edged weapons, knives and you name it, shanks. There's all sorts of different weapons that are being involved now that years ago never happened. And it's definitely a concern.
Right. So let me ask you, Scott, what's your advice? Well, are security personnel down in New Mexico armed?
Yes, sir.
So they do have the access to defensive weapons that, let's say, security personnel in Canada do not have, and in other countries. So now, having said that, what's your take on, is accessing weapons, is that of last resort? Or, I certainly understand the use of force continuum, but where do you recommend people, at what point do you recommend that they start using their weapons?
Every defensive tool has an appropriate application and a time. If you go through a simple scenario of just us talking here, and if you get verbally aggressive with me, my first level of force is I'm going to use the rules to calm you down, try to get myself out of this situation, get it resolved. Secondly, if you try to go hands-on, I have open hand techniques. I can push, shove away. You have your handcuffs or your baton and mace rather. Those are obviously control weapons. If you're trying to hit me with something large and long, I can try to hit you with something large and long, i.e. my baton. If I can get you on the ground and under control, I can put you in handcuffs. Firearms are always going to be your last resort. The way I handle it is the same way I handled it. handled it when I was in Iraq in the military. Don't fire until fired upon. That seems to be a pretty safe way of handling things. When we were in our instructor class, I explained I was involved in an incident where I was shot at. I retreated to a safe position. My partner, who was armed at the time, had the right to shoot back, but as they came around the corner, revealed themselves, we started a whole new process. So shooting was not actually the answer in that situation. Trying to get ourselves out of it was. So using weapons, any defensive tool, is going to be a matter of last resort, but there is an applicable time.
Well, I want to remind the audience too that if you do have questions that you want me to pass on to either Don or Scott, please, or myself, please post your questions. You can either post them in the chat box, or you can post them in the question box. Question for Don first, for you, and then Scott. Don, what's your advice for? Well, so I guess first of all, I want to ask a question. There's a comment here that violence against security professionals has always been high, and I agree with that. I mean, years ago, I got my start working loss prevention for a national retailer, and I worked for a couple of years of LP and then 4 years internal investigation. But in those 2 years that I was working, we faced occasional, lots of weapons, scissors definitely, like improvised weapons, scissors, lots of fights, lots of foot chases, lots of pushbacks. Guns were not as prevalent then as they were now. But having said that, I actually worked at a store where 18 months before I started, a guy was arrested for shoplifting, and he did shoot one of the loss prevention officers. Turns out this guy was actually a mass murderer wanted in California for torturing and killing 11 people. He's now on death row in California. And so, I mean, that's probably the worst example of the kind of people that we had to deal with. But even back then, 30 years ago, I mean, I was dealing with people who had warrants out for they had national warrants out for their arrest. They were out, they were out on bail for all kinds of criminal activity. So I guess what I'm saying is, I'm wondering if are we blowing this out of proportion? Are we being blasé about this? Are we being appropriate like this? Is it appropriate that we just take this in stride to think, wow, it's just another day at the office? Don, what do you think?
Well, another day at the office, I think you can take it up a few levels above that. Yeah, and yes, I agree with you. What happened in the past is a lot different than what is happening now for a lot of different reasons. But I also look at the level of training available back then for security was a lot different than it is now. So again, being prepared, the mental toughness and all that, situational awareness, it's absolutely essential.
Right.
And, taking advantage of that and, recognizing that, yeah, it's a different world out there now than it was, years ago. And just preparing for that and understanding that, I think, is important.
Right. So let me ask you, I do agree that there is more training available. I mean, when I worked for the retailer, we were not provided with no training, like nothing.
That was common.
But what advice would you give to people who are working in the industry, obviously being cognizant that different countries and different areas and different states and provinces have access to different training, that training is expensive. But what advice would you give to somebody starting out, I guess, in the security world and in wanting to get more training, even if it's on their own? What would you tell that person?
There's a lot of places to research and, and talk to people in the security industry about training that they may have received, where you can get it, what training is appropriate, what levels of force that security personnel have been exposed to in the past. Find out as much as you can about the job, the situations involved in the job, and just, like I said, everything that you can about security. Talk to as many people as you can and get a well-based, knowledge level on what is it you can do to prepare for it and all the circumstances that go along with it.
Right.
It's just like policing. You get to know what a police officer does and, take the appropriate steps to go that direction and talk to people. That's the biggest thing.
Right. Scott, what do you say about all this? What advice would you have for young up and coming security practitioners?
My biggest piece of advice is go through your internet, look at the different security companies that you have in your area. For example, in my area, I have anywhere from 8 to 12 security companies that I can go to their websites in probably about an hour and go through their website, look for how they train their officers, what they expect of their officers, and that'll give you a pretty good idea of, as a baseline, what the expectations are. The trainers also have their individual websites, so go to the training websites, look up firearms instructor, look up security guard instructor, handcuff, mace, baton instructors. They all have their own websites. They'll all have tidbits of information they keep on there. As Mr. Muldoon said, research is your biggest tool. So, I can't tell you.
Okay, thanks, Scott. So Don, question for you, and then I'll bounce back to Scott again. Don, what advice would you have? Is how do you tell that, like, everybody can have a website and things can look really, really good. And if, you know, most people are going to say, hey, I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread, and so I'm the best trainer out there. But what would you look for to make sure that a trainer is actually qualified? Because we all know that there are good trainers out there and there are not so good trainers. So what advice would you give?
Well, talking to the individuals and see what they make promises. What do they tell you? This is going back a few years in the martial arts world, but it was flying around Calgary, and I would get this question all the time, is what's the best place to take martial arts, and what is the best martial art to take? Well, my response to that is the best martial arts to take is the one you will enjoy doing and keep doing. As well as what I heard was there was an individual going around telling people that I can make you a black belt in 2 weeks. So people hear that, what are they going to do? They're going to go there. Well, I can be a black belt in 2 weeks. Well, anybody who's been in the martial arts world at all knows that is anything but true. So listen to what they have to say, what they tell you, and you'll be able to weed out a lot of the ones that are just trying to suck you into spending money, and just listen to what they have to say and their logic, and you're going to have to make a judgment call. Again, talk to security personnel who have, you know, training in that, and see what they say about it. But I agree, research is your best option, and talking to people.
And Scott, what advice would you have for this, for somebody wanting to find a good instructor?
For somebody wanting to find a good instructor, what I would do is look at what is being required of me first. So if I'm working a post that only requires me to go handcuff, mace, baton, which is our level 2, I'm not going to go out and seek level 3 training right away, which is the ability to carry a firearm. What in regards to the instructors, truthfully, we all teach the same thing. It's a matter of how we teach it that makes it different. I would look for instructors that have more going on in their class, more student demonstrations, in-class training exercises. Look for instructors that have videos of their training on their websites. That'll give you a good idea of what you're looking for in the instructor. It'll kind of give you a warm-up phase, so to speak. Those are the biggest things that I use.
Right. So I guess to answer my own question, because I've done a little bit of self-defense training and a little bit of both verbal and physical conflict de-escalation training. I was the padded attacker guy. I've done some work. I've worked with Don for many years, and I was the guy who, would, create the scenario, and I'd either grab somebody or I'd have somebody grab me or punch me out or whatever. And I'll tell you, if my own, like what I told everybody else is, don't think you can attend a 1-hour training session and that's going to do you forever. I mean, it's not. I said, if you're serious about this, join a gym or create your own training program, and then basically stick with it for the rest of your life, right? You want to be physically fit. You want to be able to take care of yourself. You want to be active. Joining a gym is a fantastic thing. And there's, these gyms have jumped up or popped up all over the world. Definitely one of the things that you want to be careful about, though, is technique, because I've seen and I've experienced it myself, where if you're taught improper technique, you can actually hurt yourself far more than getting into a fight with somebody else. You'll damage yourself way more if you don't know what you're doing. And so, yes, I mean, research, find out what other people are saying. I mean, one of the benefits of the internet today is that there's pretty much comments about everything and everybody that you can find online. And, but yeah, I'll say the same thing about training that I will say about anytime you want to buy if you want to install a security countermeasure, is buyer beware, right? You've got to do your homework. So,
and if I can add to that, Glenn.
Yeah, absolutely.
What I've noticed here, well, especially in the Calgary area, is martial arts clubs come and go. Like I've talked to a few clubs over the years, and they take your money up front. You pay for a year's advance for your training, which is fine. But a lot of them aren't around for that length of time. So you have to be careful with that. You know, you find a club that has a reputation, has been around for a long time. And, you know, the same research you would do if you're just looking at an instructor, you look at the club itself. Because, like I said, clubs come and go, they disappear really quickly. And so that's another thing you have to look at too.
Right. I've been monitoring the chat as we're going along here too, and there was a comment here, which a sentiment expressed that I wholeheartedly agree, which is that, you know, most people are working for somebody else, let's say, and you know, you got a security person who's working either contract or in-house. So many of these people often rely on their employer to provide them with training. But I agree that I mean, it's your profession or it's your career, and you got to take, or we all have to take personal responsibility for our career. And that if we're working for a company that doesn't provide us with the level of training that we think we need, I mean, it's certainly acceptable to ask for more training, but I also, you know, to echo what Don and Scott have said, go outside and get your own training, right? Like look for alternative options to, for you to take additional training. And to be perfectly honest, if you're working this is my career advice, I guess. If you're working for a company and if they don't respect you enough to give you the kind of training that you need for the position you're in, you're probably working for the wrong company. And the way I view it is that, like when you go work for an organization, there's a mutual relationship going on. You're providing them with a service. They're obviously providing you with a salary. But I think it's got to be deeper than that. And I think that the organization that you're working for has got to be worthy of your efforts. If you're working your butt off for that organization, they need to be reciprocating, and they need to be showing appreciation to you by supporting you how they can. So again, I would just urge everybody to make sure that the company that you're working for is worthy of how hard you work. So
I have to agree with that, Glenn. Some of the companies that I've trained here in town, you can tell that their employer is valuing them as people and as employees, because I'll run into these individuals year after year, and a lot of it is the same people in the same positions. And then there'll be other security companies that you see, it's always different faces always going through. And I'll ask them about that, and they'll say, yeah, they provide training for us. And the ones that provide training for us will have more long-term employees than the ones that don't. Because there is definitely the way, you know, security personnel look at who they're working for. They're getting training from them. They feel an obligation to stay there and work with them. So it does make a difference.
Right. Yeah. No, sorry, Scott.
Sure.
Did you want to jump on this?
I was going to say the exact same thing. If you don't take the time to really look into what you're doing and look at the training that you're trying to get, you're really short-sighting yourself. I've been put in the position where I've spent countless amounts of money on additional training just because my boss wouldn't do it later to find out that it wasn't necessary training at all. So also understand that you have to make sure that the training that you're getting is mission essential. I'm not saying that as a level 2, don't go get level 3 trained or whatever. What I am saying is focus on what you're doing, because in that moment, that's when it's going to be most important. For example, my domestic violence situation, I went into that situation as a level 2. I only had handcuffs, mace, and baton. And I was caught between 3 different people fighting, and one with the firearm. No backup, nothing. So understanding that, A, I shouldn't have gone into that situation by myself. B, going into a situation like that where violence could escalate rather quickly, I should have been better trained for that position.
Right. So can you just quickly explain to everybody online? I think there's in New Mexico, there's level 1, level 2, level 3.
Yes, sir.
Can you expand on that just so people
So,
know what you're talking about?
yeah, it's really easy. Level 1, you're an unarmed security personnel. You don't have handcuff, mace, baton, firearm, or ammunition. You're the keeper of the keys, as we like to put it. In your level 2 positions, you have handcuff, mace, and baton. You're going to be put into positions where they want loss prevention personnel unarmed, working apartment complexes, shopping malls, places at night, stuff like that. Your level 3 personnel, they're armed with handcuff, mace, baton, firearm, and ammunition. So those personnel are going to be put on courtesy patrol, higher risk level apartment complexes, and more complex post assignments.
So I've got a question for both of you, and well, I'll start with you, Scott. And so, sorry, I just want to say we're at 8:30. We're at 8:35 right now. I mean, normally this webinar is scheduled for half an hour, but if everybody, I know that both Scott and Don are good, so we're going to go till about 8:45 if that's acceptable for everybody. So where was I going with this? So, question for both of you, but starting with Scott. I mean, you can be a level 1 security. Is this level 1 security officer? Is that what they call it?
Yes, sir.
Right, but you can be a level 1 security officer, but you could find yourself in a much higher level of escalation of violence.
Yes, sir.
Like, so what's your advice for somebody who is at a level 1 train, like who've been trained to that level 1, like?
So my advice, I understand where you're going. My advice on that is, if you know that the situation that you're being assigned to is beyond your depth, don't do it. I've been involved in many situations where I was a very low level security guard sent into very higher level security situations that I should have never been put in. Exactly, Adrian, know your limitations. Don't put yourself in a position where you're going to get hurt unnecessarily, is my biggest point. If you're a level 1, don't go into a situation where you know people have guns. That's point blank.
So Don, one of the things that I know you, because we've had this conversation many times, is around basically CPTED, positioning and situational awareness. Can you talk about that, maybe where you've got somebody who may find themselves in a position like that, an unexpected level of violence that they hadn't planned for or prepared for?
That can happen quite easily. And I look at, some of the buildings that I've been in over the years, the little nooks and crannies that, people hide in. And when I do one of the courses, I actually do a CPTED walkabout. Go around their building and we pick out, locations, what could happen here, be prepared for this, weapons of opportunity, so they have that mindset of looking for things and knowing what to do. And I think it comes down again to the training the mind, the mental toughness. What would I do if there was somebody here? What would I do if that person attacked me? What escape routes do I have? Where's the nearest exit? Knowing all these things about a location that you might be working in and knowing what you can do and what is there. And there's places you go and situations, some of the parkades downtown, as you know, Glenn, after hours, they turn into a totally different world. And so you may end up going with backup, like in policing. There's lots of times where a situation will present itself and you have that little voice in your head, and listen to that voice. We have it for a reason. It's not just something nattering at you. That's what we've survived for thousands of years, by listening to that little voice. Wait for backup, go in with somebody else. Just don't go in. If you're not prepared to deal with something, don't go in, don't do it.
Right. That little voice, Don. I mean, for those of you who have heard of him, Gavin DeBecker has written a book
Yes.
called The Gift of Fear. And that's exactly what it is. But Don, you and I have had a number of conversations, and I'll ask you this first, and then I'll ask Scott. What books would you recommend to somebody who wants to learn more about this, just to find out more about situational awareness, about your own limitations, about pushing your boundaries, all those sorts of things? Who are you reading for motivation?
Well, there's a few. It's not just books, but I look at a lot of individuals online. One that I've been following for some time is Jocko Willink. He does a lot of good stuff. He has a lot of webinar stuff online. Very level-headed guy to talk to. Joe Rogan, a lot of his guests, on his webinars. Another one is David Goggins. He does a lot of stuff. And just a warning, his language is pretty rough. So, if you're not into that, that's fine. But it's individuals like that you can learn so much from, and the experiences they've been through. I read Goggins' book, very good book, and it explains his whole life and how he ended up where he is today.
And so what's his book? It's Live to Tell. Is that what it's called?
What was that again, Glenn?
What's the name of Goggins' book?
You Can't Hurt Me.
You Can't Hurt Me. And I read his book after Don turned him on to me, so to speak. And so I did read his book, and you can actually get it on Amazon for like $10. Yes. So yeah. Scott, how about you? Like who do you look for inspiration?
Like Mr. Muldoon mentioned, I listened to Jocko. I followed David. Another one is I follow the Sean Ryan show at Vigilance Elite. Yes. I read a lot of, I'm a former Marine, so I read a lot of military publications, small unit leadership, different things like that. I'm not one author in particular. I just read whatever I come across. I'll read an article that I find in my inbox just to see if the information is relevant. If it's not, I discard it. But my advice on this is always read the material of the people who come before you. That's the smartest thing that you can do. In the military, that's driven into our head from day one. If you want to know how to be a good leader, you want to know how to be a good Marine, soldier, airman, sailor, whatever, look into the people that were there before you. As Mr. Muldoon said, and you said too, Glenn, talk to other security officers, talk to the careerists that most of the instructors that I know, they're career security guards. So there's a lot of people that you can tap into, not just book wise.
Right. I'm gonna wrap this up here in a couple of minutes, or we're gonna wrap up in a couple of minutes, but I just want to go back to something that Don said about that fact that security personnel do not have the same equipment and let's call it PPE at this point that your average police officer has. But Don, you also made the comment about you said the best weapon you had was your mouth. My interpretation of that is the most powerful weapon that we all have is our brain.
Your mind, your mouth, yes. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as long as your mouth and your brain are engaged at the same time.
Working together, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting because when I worked loss prevention, I had a couple of police officers say to me that they would never have done my job like without the weapons that they had access to. But I never felt that my life was in danger. Like even when I had people pull weapons on me, I don't know. I don't know, maybe I underestimated it, but I think that I had good situational awareness. And I know one of the most important things you teach is situational awareness. Just any closing statements on that concept that you want to make everybody aware of?
Just do it and practice it. That is the big thing. Do the research, find out as much information as you can, but it's a practice skill. it's not something you're going to achieve overnight. You know, mental toughness and situational awareness, you have to develop it. And practice, practice, practice. It's just like martial arts. Like you said, you can take a 1-hour course. That doesn't mean you're, you know, going to go out there and take on the world. It's something that you have to be doing all the time.
Right.
And practicing.
Yeah. No, I agree. So how about Scott, from yourself? Any closing statements that you just want to finish this webinar off with?
For everybody, my biggest thing is pay attention to your situation awareness, pay attention to your use of force continuum, and pay attention to your legal knowledge, because those 3 things are going to be the biggest impactful things on your everyday job.
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly. One of the things that I found out in my research into workplace violence was that the more successful personnel, security personnel, were the ones who really knew the rules of the site, and they knew their legal the legal parameters in which they were operating in, because they found in particular that if they had any doubt about what they should or shouldn't be doing, that the person that they were dealing with, like the subject, if they could find a crevice or a crack in the armor, that they would leverage that as much as they could. And if a security officer / guard lacked confidence or seemed to lack knowledge, that was a weakness that subject would just totally focus on and really try to take advantage of that. So can't stress enough that, you know, you bring up an excellent point, the situational awareness, but knowing the rules of the site and knowing your legal parameters, and because that's going to be tested. Absolutely.
Every day.
So this brings the 4th global webinar to an end. I really appreciate, and I want to thank both Don Muldoon and Scott Carafa. So thank you both guys. I really appreciate it. And I also obviously want to thank all the attendees for dialing in today and participating. And I've been monitoring the chat, and there were some good conversations going on. So I really appreciate everybody, and we'll see you hopefully we'll see everybody a month from now as well. So that brings our webinar to a conclusion. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks very much, Glenn.
Thank you, guys.
Take care, everybody. Bye.